All right. So Dr. Booker-Drew was my mentor when I was going through my nonprofit management courses, and she works at World Vision. She is also the CEO of Solstice Consultancy, where she works with nonprofits to help them streamline their business processes and understand better how to run their business. Her work at World Vision is pretty amazing. She's in charge of collaboration building across the southern U.S. And so they go together with community groups and they build these collaboration and coalition networks to really make impact for long-term impact for that community. The World Vision, I have to say, I'm so impressed with their ability to not recreate the wheel. So a lot of nonprofits, they go out and they recreate the wheel and they do their own thing because they're a nonprofit and they want to do that thing. But the focus of her department is really around building coalitions within communities so that nonprofits are not doubling up on services, but all the needs are getting met, and businesses have a part in that too, to be able to really contribute and make this a good partnership for those areas. She just recently got her PhD, so she is officially a doctor, and I'm super impressed that she's able to hold down a traveling full-time job and get a PhD and do a dissertation and show up here 2 nights after a root canal. So thank you so much for being here. And she has a book as well. I'm sure she's going to mention it, but if you want the book, she brought some copies, I see. So yeah, thank you.
Joni's my heart, so I would come out at any time that she asked me to, 2 days after a root canal. So bear with me, I am on hydrocodone and I'm very happy. and so I am probably more relaxed than I need to be. So if we start singing Kumbaya at some point, know that it's not me, it's the drugs. I'm blaming any mistake on the drugs, so I apologize up front for that. Joni, thank you for the introduction and inviting me to this tonight. It's so cool to have a small, intimate group to talk with and kind of share some experiences and ideas. Kind of to elaborate on what you said about my work at World Vision, I actually am National Community Engagement Director, which basically means I supervise a team of folks around the United States in Seattle, Southern California, Chicago, North Texas, DC, New York, and our rural site in West Virginia, Appalachia, which basically means I travel a whole lot. My daughter is an amazing child. You see she's on that phone.
Did you hear that?
Because she has to tolerate her mama traveling and talking about social capital and organizations all the time. She just knows it's nonprofits, and that's pretty much it. So what I do for World Vision is really help, as Joni mentioned, help build the convening strategy. Because one of the things that you know with nonprofits is that we don't really talk to each other. We're so siloed and trying to do all this work, and we don't know who's in our backyard. So one of the things that I want to invite you to, and Joni was our speaker last year, is something called Community Engagement Day, which is on October 4th at UNT Dallas. This is the 4th annual day, and it starts at 8:30 in the morning, and it ends about 3:30, 4 o'clock. Free food.
It's delicious.
It's amazing. But this year, we have taken it up a level because we're bringing Dr. Pedro Noguera in from NYU. Dr. Noguera is like a celebrity academic. He is brilliant. I met him at a conference in Santa Fe. And his focus is similar to mine about how do you build social capital in communities. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But he's going to be the keynote speaker. And so to have someone who comes in and really knows communities and how to build relationships is just such a wonderful asset. And it started really 4 years ago by me having an idea and going to UNT and saying, hey, I got this idea, love. I want to bring organizations together and get them to connect to each other. And so the day is broken up where the first part of the morning, people are divided by their focus areas. So if it's mentoring or youth programming or, whatever the case may be, we divide people up, and then students serve as facilitators. The second part of the day is really by neighborhood. So people, that are Arlington, Fort Worth, and that typically is a large grouping for us, and also South Dallas. So it's really interesting to see these pockets of interest. And what is amazing to me is every year people go, I didn't know you existed. I had no idea we were doing the same work, and you're right down the street from me. So what we're trying to do is really help organizations understand this kind of continuum of collaboration. How do you start off with, sharing information to where you really are building these coalitions and you're collaborating, and ultimately, you probably have heard this buzzword, collective impact. Everybody's talking about United Way is on this thing, we need to do collective impact. So really what we want to do is not be the ones responsible for collective impact, but really facilitate organizations doing that kind of work. Collective impact has 5 principles, short and easy, but the one that we want to focus on is the shared vision. How do you bring all these stakeholders in a room together? And it's not just folks from the nonprofit sector, but it's business and people that are in education, all these different sectors to come together and solve for social issues. And so what you're finding is Dallas has a social impact group that's working around health issues and childhood obesity. Chicago is starting to do the same thing around United Way. There's a group called FSG that kind of put together this idea, and you can find the article in Stanford Social Innovation Review. If you don't get that journal, get on their list. But it is an amazing journal with all these kind of ideas in nonprofit management, and it really helps you stay kind of on the cutting edge of what's going on in the sector. For so often, we just thought people were doing work, and now to see people really having research behind the work is just amazing. So it's ssir.org, I think is the web address. But the article on collective impact really kind of started this trend where people started going, wow, we're not really talking to each other. Business has some solutions, but that's not going to be the solve-all. And education may have some. It's, social services. How do we bring these groups together and have conversations around how do we solve for these issues? And when they've done this, and they've even done this globally, they've really made impact. And so that's one of the things that we want to be able to do is help communities and community organizations start having these conversations. And so that's part of my job is to train people around that and to help my team really be able to have the tools to go in community and do that kind of work. So that's it in a nutshell. I won't bore you with all the resume stuff because it's boring. I read it sometimes and go, I'd like to meet her. So we won't even get into it. I was saying it to a friend and I said, who is she? She sounds kind of cool. And I figured out, that's why I'm tired. So there's a couple of points that I really want to go over tonight, and one of them is the social capital piece, which is what my PhD is on. So we're going to spend some time doing some things around social capital and networking, a term that I have some issue with. But we're going to spend some time doing that. So what I want you to do is break up into groups of 3. Pick a person that you really don't know and get into groups of 3. And then I'm going to tell you what you are going to do in your groups. So find a group and 3 people. Child, you don't have to be involved. Child, you just stay out and observe. So 3 people. Okay, so we may have a group of 2. It was, but that's okay. That's all right. We can make it work.
You go up there for a little commentary.
I'm working.
Okay.
I love you. Okay, so. No, she's not.
Okay, then he's on a group 3.
Let's take a group. Even if it's a group of 4.
Okay, make a group of 4. All right, cool.
We're gonna make it work. Okay, so this is what you're gonna do. You're going to have 1 minute, each person, 1 minute to talk about you. Sounds hard, doesn't it? Some of you, it will be a breeze. We will have to go. For others, this may be a struggle. So you're going to spend 1 minute talking about who are you? What do you like? Don't talk about so much other people like, my kids do this, because so often we talk about ourselves, especially women, in relationship to others. I want you to talk about you. What do you like? What don't you like? What scares you? What are your thoughts? Why are you here? I want you to talk for a minute, and then I will stop you. The other people in the group cannot talk. They've got to listen and think of things that they would like to ask you later. And then we'll go to the next person. Same activity. And then the next person. And then we will go back, and you will kind of talk about, so tell me a little bit more about, you said you kill dogs. Tell me, why do you do that? And you're dialing 911 at the same time. So we can ask those questions. You tell me things that I can write down later and go, watch that person. So you're going to get started. Let me put my stop clock on. And you're gonna get started in a few seconds. We're no talking now, don't cheat. You're tech people, y'all are supposed to be honest. You're not liberal arts majors like I was. You don't do that. Okay, so get started now.
And I thought my resume's.
Okay, that's it.
Harder than it's.
Okay, so let me ask some questions before, let's do this. Debrief. You've already started, but I want the rest of you to kind of talk about what were some things that were unanswered for you or you want to get a little bit more clarity on. So spend the next 2 minutes kind of going through with each person and going, that was interesting, or I'd have thought about this, or we have this in common. And so use this time. I won't, be so hard on time. As hard. But spend some time debriefing. So, go.
Okay, so I want to know what's the deal with water.
I
don't know. When I was a kid,
Like a fear?
I don't know. When I was a kid, I used to swim all the time and have my hands in water. Then I don't know. Somewhere down the line, it just.
But you don't know, why are y'all? Somebody told you.
Maybe I suppressed it. I don't know. That's what this guy's
Okay,
for.
so you need to ask me.
And I've been writing since I was like 9.
Okay. You didn't grow up around that.
Mostly, I tell people stuff.
It's something that happened from a young age.
Too old? No, never too old.
I just
I
like
was
it.
in my early 20s.
She's trying to figure out how to get.
Really got a vision and picture for how I could contribute.
No, I can understand if it's the ocean. It's
Never let
sharks.
go.
The sharks are scary to me, so I don't go there. Anymore. I used to go there.
It really isn't.
I don't know.
So, I figured out that you liked that because you said you liked to find out how life works. And so when you were younger and wanted to know how adventure works or how the nature is and things like that. Because my son walked there and so I always wondered what 2-hour
You just kind of look at something and then you're like, how do small pieces work out like this right here?
That's what he would do. He'd figure out, I want to put this together and how is this mine?
I don't know. I just try to. It's hard to explain. What was that?
It's his personality.
And then I decided that was self-service.
Yeah, is that more with men now? It's across the It's awesome.
It's great therapy. It's very therapeutic.
I wish I was more into certain.
You can focus
Well,
on
he's
one
very
thing and
social.
accomplish your goal.
Okay, glad I can start talking.
I'm working on it. I'm working on
I've
it.
done that before.
You know these are the parts
Yeah, well,
us for thinking that's
I feel
therapeutic.
like
I think we're all for thinking
it needs to be expanded, because I'm the kind of person I would love to see something.
It's true, there is some value in what they say.
Doing all the group activities and stuff that I do, especially at the first I'm seeing between 5 and 8 years. Actually, when I get people on my mail, and I've been doing this for 4 years, so I just feel like I need to expand. I need to target the volunteers, I need to offering this at other geographic locations, and then also just
Yeah, I want to go to Japan.
I highly recommend it. I'm gonna have to talk to you about your business and the website and what I
Okay, let's stop. Okay, so if everybody can come back together. Some of y'all really engrossed, so that's kind of these conversations, trying to read lips back together. Okay. So what were some ahas that you had with this activity about other people and then also about yourself in terms of listening? What kept you engaged? Because I was watching and it looks like all of you are really engaged. What?
That this demure, sweet little girl here has a big gun, not just a gun, but a big gun, and she's not afraid to use it on anything that's alive. Anything, and it could be an animal or human.
So looking at her, you would have never.
No.
Right.
Just to make clarification, I work at the Fort Worth Zoo night security, so I carry a gun on me. There.
So now we know why you're really going to South Africa.
She's going to write down, may be concerned with this at a later date.
Or play security for everywhere we go. Yeah, that's cool.
And yes, I am licensed by the state as a security officer, so.
I was listening to you going, okay. Thank you. Any other ahas? Thanks for sharing. Yeah, 'cause I was going to bring that up if you did. Any other ahas that you all had in this group and talking? What kept you so engaged?
Well, I found a lot of common interest with Brandon and Jeanette. Yeah. I thought like in a small group maybe even Brandon, we were talking about different personality types, you know, but yet we shared some common interest.
Right. Good. Any other comments from you all?
Well, this guy thinks he's shy, but I don't agree.
I'm shy. I'm just working on it, and apparently I'm doing a good job.
He's doing a good
You
job.
really are. I would have never known that.
I know.
Wow. Any other ahas? I want to give you all another, because the gun story kind of captivated everybody, and I was going, really? So,
I think that's everybody's biggest aha moment when they find that out about me.
because you don't look it.
Yeah, exactly.
I was more impressed with earlier conversations about building hope chests. I was like, woman that builds, yes, that's cool.
That's awesome.
Just learning more about the people that I'm getting to know them. Knowing that they want to go traveling everywhere.
What about you all? What were some ahas? What kept you engaged?
It was interesting to see how each of us is really passionate about serving nonprofits. You know, that's not something that necessarily everybody shares, but it's kind of cool.
So one of the things that I want you to pay attention to in this activity is the power of the story. And I think so often when we are talking about networking, what we are so interested in is getting a business card. I want to meet you so you can do something for me. And it really is more transactional than it is transformational. And so what you experienced tonight was an opportunity to see that you have more in common than you did different. And so I always like to kind of tell my story a little bit because I think it's important to what happened with you all. I think sometimes it's so easy for people to look at someone and make judgments and go, oh, they're like this. And it's until we hear the story that you start realizing, wow, either we have a lot in common or I didn't even think that's who you are. And so, you know, one of the stories that I always talk about was when I was growing up, I was very fortunate. My parents were high school sweethearts. And they dated from the time they were 14 until my dad passed away. They were together. And so they divorced and remarried. And so most people have this assumption that, oh, wow, you know, a lot of people don't have parents that are together that many years. And for me, that was a commonality, is having that experience. But I think one of the things that was so striking for me was when I was 14 years old, we were homeless. Our house caught a fire. And so we had to live with different relatives and move around to stay with, you know, cousins. I ended up at first staying with my grandparents and then moving in with some cousins. And that was so powerful for me at 14 years old because my hair started falling out at a time when, you know, you're supposed to be so concerned with fashion and what you look like. I was going through this stress of, oh my God, where are we going to stay? And can we actually move back into the place that we had lived in? Thanks, Johnny. And so when you look at me, you would never think that someone had that kind of experience. But I think it's a power of the story that you're able to go, wow, you know, either I didn't know that or there's something that connects us to each other. And so there's a term that's called narrative identity, which is amazing because what people do not realize is within your story is your identity. What you tell about yourself is really telling who you think you are, how you feel about yourself. And I often tell people, listen to your story. Because sometimes you're telling the wrong story about who you are and then wondering why you're getting certain results. So if you say, I'm shy, and we're constantly saying things like that, because I would say that I'm shy, and people are going, no, you're not. I had to really begin to change my story so that my outcome was different. So even though I may not have felt that way at the moment, I began to start going, I'm outgoing. Because I was painfully shy. I couldn't look at people in the eye, you're doing that well. I was like, snuffleupagus. So I could not look at anybody. I was terrified of that. And so I had to really begin to start examining the story that I told about myself and recognizing that my identity is tied to who I am. It's very interesting that even the roles that we talk about it, I heard some of you talk about relationships and interests and things that you have. Our roles even are part of how we see ourselves and identity. The one thing that is constantly evolving and changing in our lives is our identity. It's the narrative. That is the one thing you can count on that is constantly changing. You sometimes meet people that when they get older, they talk about things that it may have happened. I catch myself doing. I'm stuck. My daughter tells me in 1970 and 1980. I cannot stop listening to the music. I'm just really stuck at 80, Duran Duran, and some other bands that I shouldn't even say that I really still like. I love Hall & Oates, and so I'm stuck in this place. But because there was so much memory for me, that's where my identity can sometimes get stuck, because it was a great time. I was growing up and I didn't have to pay bills and life seemed good. And so for a lot of people, what happens is because we haven't created a new identity, we get stuck in the roles that we were in. That's something to pay attention to, because all of us go through that at some place in our lives. So the story is very, very powerful, and it's important for you to think about. How does story connect us to each other, though? What do you think? Because you just had that experience. How does story make us connect to each other?
Find things that have in common.
Yeah. I think that's what's going to change this country, in all honesty. Is sometimes we look at people and go, those people over there are there like this. And I think when you start having story and begin to talk to people, you realize how much you have in common. I was so amazed when I went to India in 2008. It was part of a documentary. And I remember going, and I had these kind of preconceived notions about what I was going to see and what I was going to experience. And it was amazing to see people who had such poverty, and they wanted the same things for their family and children that I do. So they wanted their kids to go to school and get educated. And you're thinking, that's the exact same thing that I want. They wanted neighborhoods that were clean and safe. They wanted to have drinking water that they, could really not have to deal with challenges that come from that. I mean, it's just amazing having that experience, and it made me realize we have more in common than we do different. And it's not to say that you want to minimize the differences, because one of the things that we tend to do in this country is we want everybody to be just alike. Well, that's boring. I like people that are different because I can learn something from the diversity of the experience, whether it's age or race or class, whatever it is. It helps enhance who I am. And that experience was life-changing for me, to begin to see that people who were halfway around the world had some of the same desires that I did around my life, and had, dreams of building businesses. That's amazing, but I would have never known that if I hadn't taken time to listen to the story. So part of connecting and this networking idea is, how do you take the time to listen to people's stories? How do you make it where it's not, I'm shoving a business card, down your throat so we can talk and connect, but how do I really begin to see if there's some connection? There's a term that's called high quality connection that's really interesting. And it talks about, have you ever met somebody and as soon as you meet them, there's like this strong connection and you're like, wow, this is amazing. I could talk to you all this time. Well, that's what you really are trying to seek. And we can't do that if we don't tell the story. So what I find is the opposite often happens. Have you ever been around people that they drain you and you want to get a drink after you met with them? They're so negative and they're so depressing that you're just like, oh my God, I want to jump right now. And people term it energy vampires. But how do we create spaces for people to be safe and to feel positive and not allow the woundedness that they go through to totally define who they are? That's a piece of the journey, but it's not all of who they are. And so the only way that we can do that again and build those high quality connections is when we are in community, that we're having conversations. So there's a term I've been bringing up that I want to kind of introduce to you, and then we'll do some questions and talk a little bit more and give you some tips. There's a term that I love that's social capital, and I'm struggling with this term. My professors have been on me about I need to come up with another term for it, because I have a problem with the capital piece. Because what it means is that your relationships are ones that you can buy, and they're profitable. So do you remember the DirecTV commercial where they had pictures of Benjamin Franklin, and it was like for every one of your friends, they represented like this Benjamin Franklin $100 bill. And I remember looking at that thinking to myself, oh my God, we have got to a place where now we're pimping our friendships to make money. That we really aren't interested in building relationship and getting to know people. We're interested in how it benefits me. And so social capital is really looking at networks and associations and relationships and how people build those. The term's been around since, the probably 1800s. There's a gentleman probably around 1916 when you start seeing it written in literature, and his name was Hannafin. He talked about this rural school experience where these parents were getting together talking. And he goes, this is social capital. They're building these relationships. And the term kind of grew and went through all of these transformations and iterations. But the person who you'd probably be most interested in is this guy named Robert Putnam. And he is amazing. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone. I would strongly encourage you to read it. And in Bowling Alone, he talks about what happened in this country. That there used to be a time when people bowled together. There were bowling leagues. I remember as a kid, my aunt would take us bowling. I thought it was the worst thing on the planet. It was so boring. But I loved it because they would drink. And so they would have beer. And so by the third or fourth game, you were hearing all kinds of stuff that you were not supposed to hear. And I was the quiet kid, so they never knew I was there. So I'm like, ooh, who's going with who? I didn't know they were doing. So I love that piece of it. In the beginning, it's like, get drunk, come on, start drinking, hurry up, let's get to this. And so I love the story and listening to the stories. But at one time, people used to bowl together. And that's how people build relationships. They would share stories, they talk about their kids and their families. Well, we don't have that anymore. And then he talks about in his book about dinner parties. There used to be a time when people would have these parties and invite their friends over. Do many of us do that now? Nah, we're too busy. I don't have time for you. And we're scared of our neighbors. Oh my God, I don't know. You may be crazy one. I probably am the crazy one. But you're even crazier. I don't want you in my house. I don't want you to see my stuff. And so we don't have dinner parties and talk to people anymore. And then the other thing that's fascinating me, I said this is my next piece of research, is looking at the front porch. Remember there was a time when houses had front porches. What was significant about the front porch?
People would sit out there.
Yeah, and do what? And talk. Well, and in my neighborhood, it was watching what was going on. There were the nosy old ladies who would sit up and watch everybody going in and out of the house, and who shouldn't have been going in and out of the house, who was coming out the back door. They watched everything. And so they were neighborhood patrol. But you would walk in and pull up, and everybody would talk. And so the front porch was a way for people to connect. What happened when the front porch went away? Yeah, so we do like what I've been doing. Now that I can get my car in the garage, I just pull in and go right into my house, and I don't even have to talk to my neighbors to see them. Never have to say hello. Wow, how does that change a community when people don't have the time to tell those stories? That front porch was a place where people could really sit down and talk to each other and get to know everybody, and kids were outside playing, and it was a safe place. That doesn't exist anymore. And so the quality of a community has changed because people are no longer telling stories. So how do we create that space again? How do you use this group as an opportunity where it's a safe space where people can come together and talk and share their story? And in the process, not only are you transforming nonprofits, but you're transforming who you are. Because you are listening to not only your story, but the stories of others. And saying, why do they care so much? You had made the point, the passion that people have. But if we don't talk to each other, how will we know how to harness that passion and use it? And that's what Putnam talks about. So he says in communities where there's high social capital, there's lower crime. Why? Why would crime go down?
Because you care enough to not be criminal against each other.
Or you're talking to each other and saying, hey, there's somebody here that doesn't look like they may belong, and I'm going to ask them. I'm not going to immediately shoot. I'm going to have a conversation and ask and talk to people and figure out what's going on. But for many of us, we're so afraid that we don't do that. And so you would see the rise of crime because people aren't talking to each other. So he also says that educational outcomes are higher in communities where there's high social capital. Why would that even happen? Why would kids start doing well in school?
Because the parents and people around them are more involved in their lives.
Right. They're talking to each other. Pookie and Ray were doing something they weren't supposed to today, and you're going, okay. I remember when I taught at my daughter's school, I had to leave because they were telling me everything she was doing. And it was awful. I mean, when she didn't eat lunch, I knew how many peas she left on her plate. I mean, it was awful. And then one day she was 3, I think, and she told them, she said to some of my staff, does my mommy know what you're doing? And I thought, oh God, how did she find out that I supervise these people? So they started telling me that too, that Kaze was watching them. And so, but it was, for me, it was kind of like, oh, it's time to go. When she's watching them and they're watching her, it's time for mom to go get another job. But it was something to have that kind of community. And people were telling what was going on, and they were concerned about my child, and we all knew each other. That's important to have. And so he says that in addition to these higher educational outcomes, people vote in communities where there's high social capital. Why? Why are they voting? Yes. Yes. And they feel like there's some level of responsibility, individual responsibility and accountability that happens. And so all of us, in order for our...
And the neighbor's going to be asking, did you go out and vote?
Yes. Or like I do, I check and see if you have a little sticker on, because I'll talk about you if I don't see your sticker. So you got to have your little sticker to make me feel good about you voting. I'm sorry, if I don't see it, it's a problem. Really, I'm the police on
Some people
that.
are just don't like stickers.
Well, then you better tell me up on the top that you don't like a sticker, because I'm asking. I don't care who, I just need to know that you did it. You know, but it's that level of comfort where you would feel okay in going up to somebody and saying, did you vote? Because the community now has this sense of safety and trust. And that's the one thing that makes social capital powerful, is the trust component. If you don't trust in a community, you are going to see crime go up. You're going to see all these things happen because people don't trust and they're not talking to each other. So it's a really powerful thing that I hope that you all will begin to start thinking about. How do you harness this possibility? All of you have your own networks and circles of influence. How do you harness that to really do good for the nonprofit community? What are some of your thoughts around taking this passion that you have and really using it to network and connect people to each other through this? Joan, what do you think? How do you do that?
For me personally, I am not an expert at anything at all. But I know where to find the resources that I need to get whatever need met that I come across. So I talk to nonprofits all day and I'm resource mapping for them. And I'm like, oh, you need to talk to this person because this person handles this particular expertise and they'd be a great person to talk to, or you need to talk to this person. And so for me, stories are really important because I am not a name and face person. I cannot remember people's names and I can't remember their faces. But if I have a story, if I know that in 1982 they went to a Duran Duran concert and their friend slipped them ecstasy and I know some random story about them, then I'm going to remember not only who they are, but also what they do in my life and how they fit into my life. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but mapping your resources, you cannot do that without having people and stories in your life.
So you bring up an excellent point. I'm going to use the board for this. So there's something, I don't know if many of you are familiar with, and I wasn't planning on doing this. There's something that's called ABCD. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it stands for Asset-Based Community Development. Two guys out of Northwestern developed this idea, and I was thinking, wow, we've been doing this for years and didn't have a theory behind it. But ABCD really looks at what are the assets that exist in a community. So often we tend to be deficit-based, so we're always looking at what we don't have. And what this theory really says is there are all these assets that exist even in this room that can really be used to make impact in a community. And so there are these 5 pieces to asset-based community development. So the first component, it's not first, but it's one of them, are institutions. So institutions are things like media, and it's the university, colleges. Those are large vehicles, so to speak, that you can use as an asset in a community. So how could the media be used as an asset for your work? How would you use them?
Gain exposure so how people know about what you're doing and the services you provide and how they can become involved by volunteering or donating.
Right. So give me an example. If you're a nonprofit, PSAs are free. So you can submit a PSA or media advisory. What I typically tell people to do is you do a media advisory first, which is the who, what, when, where kind of release, and you send out, then you do a press release. So that's free for nonprofits to be able to get that kind of exposure. So if you're not taking advantage of that, then you're missing an opportunity to connect with audiences who may not know that you even exist. So you can use that, whether it's internet, or I always use Dallas Morning News and the Guide Live is a great way to get people aware of what's going on. So media is a great resource. Radio stations sometimes will do that. They don't like it because it's free advertising, they're giving away time that could be paid, but typically they will do PSAs for nonprofit organizations. So that's a resource that you can use in your work. What about a university? How would that institution be something that can benefit you? It's happening right now. So from a space standpoint, they really are helpful. I use students as interns to help with the work of what I'm trying to do. So universities have a lot of possibilities. If you're looking for funding, quite often you can go in with a university around a huge grant opportunity. You may not have the ability to secure the funding, but they can be a fiduciary agent, and they can be the ones that keep the money and have the 501c3 and all the things you need, and can do the evaluation piece that typically you would not be able to afford to do or have the resources to do. So that's one piece of ABC, and there are others that are listed, so I won't go through everything in institutions. So there's institutions, there is this other one that's interesting, associations. So associations are like nonprofits and clubs and sororities and fraternities. Those are great resources that nonprofits have access to, because typically sororities and fraternities have to do community service projects. So why wouldn't you connect with them and have them as a piece of the work that you're doing? The other thing that's there is local economy. So how do you bring businesses to the table and get them interested in this? Because businesses would love to work with you, because you are directly working with nonprofits as a captive audience that they would love to touch and work with. Individuals. And typically, we tend to ignore certain groups of people. So if they're not highly educated and have all these kind of credentials, those may not be people that we want to connect to, and we miss out on opportunities when we ignore folks. And then the other piece to ABCD is what's called open space. So how do you use the land, parking lots, those kinds of things as an opportunity to do the work that you do in communities? So part of connecting, to your point, is how do you identify all these assets in communities and begin to have these stories around these opportunities to connect people to these? Because that's going to be huge, and whether it's in this group or whatever you do, it's going to be huge. And there's a lot of information online about ABCD, because it's an amazing tool, and they've got all these handouts that you can use with your boards and with other groups, and even for businesses. It's a great way to identify folks that you can sell to and work with. So it's a great, great theory, and it really does work, but it's something that, in terms of trying to build relationships, that you can use to identify folks to connect to. Any other thoughts or ideas that you might have around social capital or networking or anything that we've discussed? That was good. I'm tired.
I do have a question. When I first started Angel Lane, I used to go to a lot of chamber events and all kinds of networking groups and things like that. But I found the business to business wasn't necessarily such a good fit for me, even though, running a nonprofit is a business. I mean, you have all the same kind of needs and all these different things that you're challenged with, and you need services from other people and things like that. But I just never felt like it was a really good fit. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a networking group that's for nonprofits, because we really kind of understand that it's a whole different ball game and different animal altogether. And I don't know, I've always been curious if there are groups like that. I mean, when I heard about this that specifically helps nonprofits and things, well, I was immediately drawn to it. So I just was curious.
So come to our day, because it's usually quite a few people that show up to that, and it's a good event, so I think that'll be one for you.
That's the one that's on
October
4th.
And just email me, and I'll see you, because you need to register so we can, make sure we have food and stuff. But send me an email, and I'll send you the link to be able to register for it. So that's an opportunity. But there are some groups. There's a group in Tarrant County. Actually, there's a collaboration group that meets in the city of Arlington, and they meet once a month. The Volunteer Center of North Texas is heavily involved in it, so I can give you all the information for that one. There's another one that's called TIDE, which is a Texas Healthy Adolescent Initiative. And a lot of people go to that one. That's probably one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. I went to one of their meetings. It was 75 people there. And there are all these different nonprofits who are interested in young people in some kind of way. So I went to their meeting, I was going, oh my God, y'all are just showing up, and that's normal. And they're like, oh, everybody's not here. But they have opportunities for people to introduce themselves and talk and look at ways that they network together. So I see a lot more of that happening in Tarrant County sometimes than I do in Dallas County. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but it's so hard to identify it. And I think people are so busy doing the work that they don't recognize the possibilities that exist when they collaborate. The other thing is from a funding standpoint. If you're really trying to secure funding, most foundations want to know that you're working with somebody, that you're not operating in a silo. So how do you have all these different groups that you're getting, resources from, whether it is, in kind, like from a World Vision, we have a facility here in Grand Prairie that's 56,000 square feet, and it's all this donated product that we give out to organizations that become members. How do you use that? You could leverage that in a grant and say, look at this in-kind donation. If I had to pay for it, it would cost us this, but we were able to get it for free. So you can use that as a match. It's really important to think about all these different opportunities for you, because you can't do everything. And I think most foundations recognize that, and they want to look at how nonprofits are working together and using their resources strategically. So email me, and I'll send you some of those contacts. I don't mind doing that.
To add to that, one of the things that I find really helpful and I do frequently is I'll do a needs assessment of whatever I'm doing. So I want to know who else is doing this or who else is doing similar work. The Center for Nonprofit Management in Dallas is a great resource in terms of listing nonprofits and what they do and giving you classes and leadership advice and things like that. The Small Business Administration also will give you business mentors and things with that nature to help you you're smart, but a lot of nonprofit people don't they come into it with a great vision and a great passion and zero business sense, and they don't run their nonprofit like a business. And so what we see is, failure, frequently a lot of failure for nonprofits. And so doing a resource map and really finding out what other nonprofits are serving my area. What do they do to serve my area? How can I work with them? How can I network and collaborate with them? And when you start that conversation, it's really interesting how far you can go with it, because nonprofits in our area, the majority of them are working head down. Just like Froswa was saying, you're working head down, you're doing the work, you're helping the people, you're helping the animals, or whatever you're doing, and you're not taking time to look up and look around and figure out who else can partner with you and make this happen better. For me, I don't find networking groups, like the majority of my networking groups, which I do a lot of networking, they aren't that helpful, the majority. But, when I can have a conversation with one person who's doing nonprofit work and they can connect me to 5 other people who might be of assistance, like that makes it worth it. And so I contribute and I take part in groups that are helpful for me, that I don't waste my time by going to networking after work, which has 500 people that show up for work. Like, I'm not going to get anything out of that. So I'm going to spend my time building specific, very intentional relationships, being intentional about who I'm speaking with and what I'm doing.
And those kinds of networking events, again, are more transactional in their approach. It's really not about how do we create this win-win opportunity. It's how many people do I think I can get business cards from, and I have real issue with that. I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it is about being deliberate and intentional. I always tell people who do this work is find a mentor. I think that's the best advice. I have a number of mentors, especially in areas that I'm weak in. I love to spend money, but I'm not the best budget person, and I manage a very large budget, so I'm always talking to people who have business acumen, because that's not my strong suit. I don't really like it, but I need people around me who understand that. So find mentors who are doing what you want to do. If there's an executive director who is managing, a multi-million-dollar project, then that's somebody that you want to learn from. So how do you do that? My former boss was so instrumental in me understanding how to raise money. It's Dr. Flowers at St. Phillips. I learned how to write grants and raise quite a bit of money just by being under his leadership. That wasn't my strong suit when I came into that role. And so, and even now, I still keep in contact with him. He is still a mentor for me. So I have a number of different people. So my advice for all of you is, if you don't have mentors who are helping you, whether it's personally or professionally, I would say both. You want people that are going to be there that can help you, who have skills that you want. I think sometimes we go after people who make us feel good, and they're not the people that are stretching and challenging us. So how do you get those people who are going to speak life? I mean, not beat you up, but speak life into you and really help stretch you and take you to the next level. So get a mentor. Find several. And I agree, I'm not much on the networking groups. There are certain pockets of places that I like going to and being around people, but I've found, like what Joni was saying, is there are certain people that I see their work and I go up to them and go, I want to meet you. I need to know you. Dallas Business Journal, and I do a lot of prospect research and looking at newspapers and what's online. So Dallas Business Journal, when I see people that are doing certain things and I want to get to know them, that's when I go to my network and go, hey, do you know this person? How could you get me connected to them? And I really believe that people are not that far separated. You'd be surprised how you can get to who you want. But it's building the network, and I think it's one story at a time. Any other comments, questions, or ideas that you want to throw out? I'll talk about the book real quickly and then we can wrap up. I wrote the book because I was doing a research group, and I had a group of women that were very diverse: Muslim, Universalist, African American, Anglo, in their 20s to their 50s. And my whole idea was they were going to share social capital. That's what I wanted to see happen. And that's not what happened initially. In the first meeting, they did like many people do. I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I do this, and I'm this, and I'm that, but, and it was kind of like, okay, that's cool. And then I said, stop that. Tell me who you really are. And people started telling me stories, and I mean, I'm crying, and all of them were people I knew, but I didn't know their stories like that. So I'm, over there typing and, trying to wipe my face off because I'm just in awe of the stories. And I noticed in that moment, what they were doing was exchanging something called psychological capital. They're talking about emotional well-being, things like optimism and hope and resilience. And they had these really amazing stories. Women you would have never thought that they had gone through some of the stuff that they did. And in sharing that stuff, they built trust. And so I thought, man, if I could do this, I could really do some things to change the world and change the way people connect to each other. So it was through their stories and some of mine that I created this book. And it's 29 rules of engagement. And it's just basically kind of a workbook. I wrote it for women, not to discriminate against men, but what has been fascinating is men have been telling me they really enjoy it, and it's for anybody. I've had a lot of guys tell me, I don't know why you say that. You need to scratch that off. It's for everybody because there's something you can get, and all of us have stories. So that's really what the book was about. My second research group was to do the exact same thing, but I applied this process called immunity to change. If you have not heard about this, it is life-changing. There are two professors out of Harvard called Keegan and Leahy who wrote a book called Immunity to Change. And the whole thing is about what keeps you from doing what you want to do. And it really helps you look at blockages that you have in your life that keep you from achieving your goals. So it doesn't tell you this is what you need to do. It doesn't fix it at all. What it does is it gives you kind of what's called an immunity map. You do this chart, and it's a map that shows you why you're sabotaging yourself. And if you do it the right way, you begin to start looking at these tapes and things that play in your head that keep you from, whether it's being on time, because some of the women in the group, time was an issue. Other women, that was a big issue for a lot of women. Other women, it was weight loss. Some women, it was things like, one lady was, I don't want to connect to anybody. I don't need any mentors. I'm very happy the way that I am, but it's hurting me. So how do I get over this block? And so what I did was apply this process for this diverse group of women, very diverse. And what we discovered is, despite the diversity that exists, when they found out their barriers to creating change, they could connect to each other. So to me, that's the issue in our country is people don't talk, and they don't look at what are the barriers that get in their way of them being able to do what they want to do with each other. And so that's what my dissertation has been about. So I'm going to save the world and change everybody's life through this process, because it is amazing. So I would say, again, if you can get the book Immunity to Change, and I'd be glad to come back and walk folks through it, but it is an amazing process where you're crying. I did it with a group in Waco, and people were just crying. I'm like, oh God, I did not prepare for y'all to start crying and singing We Are the World. I did not expect that, but it really had people just in their feelings and helped them look at themselves in a different way. So, any other comments or feedback? Because I know y'all want to go home, and my daughter saw babies. And so I know she's like,
I saw
Mama,
babes too.
let's go eat at Babes.
Yeah.
Any comments, any questions, ahas that you may have had from this experience?
A lot to think about.
Yeah, I try. Make you think.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Good. I hope it helps and it makes you think about it. If you take away anything, think about the story that you're telling about yourself and how you're using that story to connect to others. One thing that I'll leave you with, my former boss does something that is amazing to me when he first meets someone. He always goes, so if he saw Joni, he'd go, Joni Martin, tell me your story. And that always amazed me because people love to talk about themselves. And he would figure out where there was synergy in listening to their story. And I started doing the same thing when I meet somebody, is say their name and ask them to tell me their story. And then you're able to go, okay, so you like this. Okay, this is an opportunity for us to do some work around here. So that's a tool that you can use, very simple, to begin to start these conversations and learn people's stories and look at where there may be synergy and opportunities for you to connect and build relationships. It's real simple. Any other comments? Thoughts?
I'm glad our administrative associate made me come today.
I'm glad you came. So email me.
So thank
Joni
you.
knows this, that I don't let people go very easy. And so you can't get rid of me. Now, she knew how to find me, and she wouldn't give up, because I had moments where I'm just like gone. But Joni was like, no, you are staying here. And so, and I appreciate that. And so I offer that to you. If I can be of assistance or, one of your contacts, please use me. So thank you.
Thank you.